Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. There's a lot of talk right now about a bill called C-10, which is about amending the Broadcasting Act. And there's concerns about this because there is provision in there for the government to do some regulation of web giants when they act as broadcasters. But there is a bunch of questions around the issue of user-generated content, which has the Conservatives in particular acting like this is an Orwellian government censorship move, which is not true, but this hasn't been very well explained in the public, and I figured I would take the chance to try and sort some of this out so that we're all better informed. Now, I did write a piece on this for the CBA's National Magazine. I'm going to put the link for that in the description. But essentially, what the concerns are has to do with the Broadcasting Act's definition of broadcasting objectives. So, first of all, backstory. The reason why we have a Broadcasting Act in Canada is because when we were in the age of television and radio, there's only so much of that bandwidth to go around, and it's a scarce resource. And so, as Canadians who are in the shadow of, American hegemony in terms of cultural content, we wanted to ensure that we had some space carved out for things that were actually Canadian. And we had some broadcast objectives on there to ensure that what was out over Canadian airwaves had a certain reflection of Canada, and we weren't just essentially an American branch plant of the American media. So that's how we get things like Canadian content regulations, which a lot of people have strong feelings about, but they're all about kind of ensuring that we have some Canadianness in our media. Otherwise, if you look at the behavior of most private broadcasters in this country, they simply go to the American networks and pick and choose which shows they want, and any Canadian content is largely second tier. And they get around some of the Canadian content regulations by doing things like Entertainment Tonight Canada and Big Brother Canada and so on, which doesn't really kind of enrich our own cultural milieu, but that's neither here nor there for this discussion. Essentially, what they wanted with these changes to the Broadcasting Act is to ensure that web giants like Netflix and Disney Plus and so on have some increased Canadian content requirements so that we are still basically have a cultural space in the new era, but also they wanted to ensure that web giants are paying into the Canadian content system. And that's, about paying into it and then ensuring that we have, an industry that is still viable and so on. Where this particular bill kind of got into trouble was around user-generated content for things like YouTube and so on, and treating those platforms as broadcasters. And there is some good reason for treating them as broadcasters in certain examples. Facebook, for example, has streamed professional sports games. Facebook and YouTube have, in the past, created their own scripted content. They aren't currently, but they could start doing so again. And so there's concern in the Canadian cultural industries that unless they fall under the same kind of broadcast regulations as other traditional media do, then it's an unlevel playing field. And that was kind of what they were hoping to do. But this bill was very clumsy in doing so. And then we got a bunch of professors who are talking about concerns about freedom of expression. And this turned into this whole thing about this is Orwellian, this is going to be about the CRTC acting like government censors and ensuring that only liberal government-approved things wind up in social media, and that's not it at all. That's far from what it is. What the objective is about things called like discoverability, which means that they want more Canadian content to be kind of put up in the up front so that people can find it easier, so that it's more available, and so on. And this is kind of where those objections lie, because it means tweaking the algorithms and so on that change what people are able to see in their feeds. And that causes some people concerns. As well, there is concern about what these platforms might do when they look at the Broadcasting Act objectives and try and figure out how to put their content in there. And some of those objectives in the definition of the Act are things like that it provides through programming a public service essential to to the maintenance and enhancement of national identity and cultural sovereignty. And so there's concerns that trying to fit user-generated content into those kind of objectives can cause problems, that the platforms themselves will start going into content moderation in order to try and squeeze things into that, or using AI to try and do this kind of content moderation in order to fit those objectives. And I think those are relatively valid concerns. And part of the problem here is that the government just did a very bad job of drafting this bill. In more recent days, they keep saying this is about professionally produced content on those services. It's about things like music on YouTube, because that is one of the top streaming services for music in the world. And when there's things like suggested playlists, they want more Canadian stuff in those playlists. But the way the legislation is written, and even the amendments they are proposing to make it crystal clear that user-generated content is not falling under these same obligations, it's not that clear. And that's what a lot of these professors are pointing out. And that's kind of where the argument is lying here. This isn't about, the CRTC turning into some government censorship board. A, they don't moderate content as it is right now. And B, there would be absolutely no ability for them to do so without a giant expansion in their resources and staff ability to do any of this kind of stuff. Like it's not even remotely feasible or plausible. Which is why this notion that this is about government censorship is ridiculous. But at the same time, there are concerns around what it means to to force them to make Canadian content more discoverable. This is less of an issue for the Netflixes and the Disney Pluses as it is for YouTube or Instagram or TikTok. Although I have a hard time seeing how Instagram would really fit into that, but so be it. But this is kind of where the crux of this lies. So when you hear people talking about this being government censorship, it's not really censorship. It's about trying to control what you see in your feed. And that is the objectionable part. There is a fairly, I think, reasonable argument in terms of leveling the playing field on professionally produced broadcast material when these platforms act as broadcasters for this material. But the legislation is not as clear as it should be on that. And this is where the concern is. And that's kind of the nuance of the argument that we're not getting through any of the discussion that's being had right now. The Conservatives are outright lying about what the content, the issue is. The minister is flailing and not explaining himself very well. And the rest of us are kind of in the middle, just trying to scratch our heads. And which is why I wanted to do this piece for National Magazine. Doing this right now is to kind of help us to understand what's going on, so that we're not kind of caught between this nasty rhetoric going back and forth on both sides. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.